Leticia pulled the tape measure across the kitchen counter and called out the number before the contractor could guess wrong again. 94.5, she said. Not 94. Half-inch matters here. The man nodded and marked his clipboard. She handed the tape back, picked up her coffee, and walked to the window that looked out over what would become the backyard. The concrete pad was still curing. She had specified the mix herself. Water-cement ratio, aggregate size, cure time, the same way she specified everything on this job. Because this was not a job. This was her house. Hers and Fabian's, and eventually their son's, and she was not going to let a single measurement be approximate. That was 3 years ago. The house was finished now. Every corner of it plumb, every threshold level, every drainage line pitched correctly so water moved away from the foundation instead of toward it. She knew because she had calculated it herself, on evenings after Jonah went down, sketching gradients on graph paper at the dining room table, while Fabian watched television in the next room. She had worked her regular hours at the firm, driven to the site on her lunch breaks, and managed the subcontractors via text and phone call from job sites across Raleigh, where she was simultaneously managing infrastructure projects for the city. She had done it without complaint, and mostly without acknowledgement, because the house was going to be real and solid and exactly what she'd drawn. And that was its own reward. People at the firm thought of Leticia as the one who never dropped anything. Her boss, Roger Maddox, had once told a room full of junior engineers that she was the most detail-reliable person he had worked with in 20 years, and then immediately apologized for making her uncomfortable, because she had visibly winced at the attention. She preferred that the work speak. She preferred to be left alone to do it correctly. She was 34. She had a son named Jonah who was 4, and who was, without question, the best thing she had ever produced. More impressive to her than any bridge or drainage system or load-bearing calculation she had ever gotten right. He had her eyes and Fabian's laugh, which was a good distribution. She took him to the park on Saturday mornings and let him run until he fell down, and she watched him get up each time with the same tight, private pride she felt when a structure she'd engineered performed exactly as she'd predicted. She was not a woman who talked much about her own life. If you asked her about the house, she would tell you the square footage, the foundation type, the roof pitch. If you asked her about Jonah, she would tell you what he was learning, what he'd said that week that made her laugh. She would not tell you how she'd stretched the construction budget across 14 months by doing her own materials takeoffs and catching 2 significant billing errors from suppliers. She would not tell you that she had missed a work dinner she should have attended, the night the concrete was poured, because she needed to be there herself, and Roger had understood, or said he did. She would not tell you any of this, because to her it was not a story. It was just what you did. You built the thing. You checked the numbers. You showed up. Fabian showed up too, in his own way. He was tall and easy to look at. The kind of man who made strangers comfortable within 30 seconds, which was, she had always thought, probably his most useful professional quality. He sold real estate in Raleigh, mostly residential, and he was good at it in the way that charming people are good at things that require charm. He remembered names. He read rooms. He knew when to push and when to let silence do the work. These were not skills Leticia had, and she did not particularly wish she had them, but she respected them the way she respected any competency. He had brought her flowers the week they moved into the finished house, stood in the kitchen holding a bunch of dahlias, which were her favorite, and said, "You actually did it." "We did it," she said. He shook his head, smiling. "You did it. I just carried boxes." It was one of the things she had loved about him. He knew how to give credit. He knew how to see her without making her feel exhibited. 8 years of that. 8 years of someone who turned the lights off when she forgot, who handled Jonah's bedtime on the nights she had late calls, who left her alone when she needed to work and was present when she surfaced. Not a perfect man. He left cabinet doors open and was too slow to return voicemails and had a habit of overpromising on timelines. But good. Solid in the ways that mattered. On a Tuesday in March, she came home at 6:15 to find Jonah already fed, already bathed, sitting on the living room floor arranging wooden blocks into a structure that had, she noticed, surprisingly good lateral symmetry for a 4-year-old. Fabian was in the kitchen, finishing the dishes. He had cooked, actual cooking, not takeout, and the house smelled like garlic and something with tomatoes. "You didn't have to do all this," she said, setting down her bag. "Long day?" he asked. "Medium," she said. The drainage revision took longer than it should have. He dried his hands. "There's food." She sat at the table and ate while Jonah showed her the block tower from across the room, narrating it in a mix of real words and sounds that she had learned, over 4 years to translate. Fabian sat across from her with a glass of water and asked the right questions about her day. Not too many, not too few. The kitchen light was on. Outside, the concrete pad in the backyard was dry and solid and correctly graded, just as she had designed it to be. She reached over and adjusted one of Jonah's blocks that was about to slide. It held. Thursday morning. Leticia's phone buzzed at 6:47 a.m., still in the dark bedroom. A text from Roger Maddox, Reservoir North Specs. "Need revised pitch angles before 9. You're the one." She didn't wake Fabian. She sat at the kitchen table with coffee and her laptop, fingers moving across the keyboard, the house still cool and quiet. The numbers were tight, too tight. Someone had miscalculated the gradient, and if she didn't catch it, the city would sign off on a pocket of standing water that would erode the foundation in 2 years. She was on site by 7:30, walking the perimeter with a transit and a notebook, calculating corrections in her head before she even sat down to model them. At 8:22, Fabian texted, "Need my navy blazer. Big showing this afternoon. Praya's listing. High-end property in Glenwood." Leticia didn't respond immediately. She was standing in March mud, watching the grade line, thinking about runoff patterns. She texted back, "On the shelf in the closet. Right side." By 9:15, she had the revised specifications written up. She emailed them to Roger with a brief note about the original error. His response came back in 3 minutes. "You caught this." Again, "How attention," she wrote, which wasn't an answer but was true. She left the site at 10:45 and drove back through downtown Raleigh. The light was good. The sky was clearing after 2 days of rain. She was thinking about the concrete trucks that would pour tomorrow, about the compaction schedule, about the weather report for Saturday. Her phone rang through the car's speaker. "Fabian." "Hey," she said. "Hey, Jonah wants to know if he can have a playdate with Liam after school. I told him maybe, but I need to check the calendar." "Yes," she said. "Tell him yes. You can pick up chips and hummus if they want a snack." Done. She heard something in the background. A woman's voice, distant but present. She didn't ask. It was probably his office. It was probably nothing. That evening, Jonah showed her the block tower he'd been building, now more elaborate, with bridges and what he called a safe place for the animals. Fabian was already in the shower when she came downstairs. She made Jonah's lunch for the next day and checked the weather. Saturday's forecast had shifted. Possible rain in the afternoon. Friday, Fabian left the house at 7:15 a.m. He was wearing the navy blazer. He kissed her on the cheek without really looking at her and told her the showing was at 2 o'clock, that Glenwood was nearly an hour away. "Could be late," he said. "That's fine," she said. "I'll do bedtime." She was at the Reservoir North site when he texted at 2:47 p.m., showing running long. Back by 8. The work was dense. The concrete trucks arrived at 3:30 p.m. She watched the pour, checked the slump, observed the compaction. Her boots were caked with mud. Her hands were cold. She didn't leave until 5:15 when the crew had it locked in. At home, she showered and changed. Jonah was already fed, a note on the counter from Mrs. Chen, the neighbor who watched him on days like this. Jonah had mac and cheese. Said his daddy told him you'd be busy. The handwriting was careful, kind. Leticia made herself tea and sat with her son while he drew. He drew their house, which he did often, with extreme precision for a 4-year-old. The front door, the windows, the tree in the yard. He colored the tree green and the house a shade of brown that was almost exactly right. At 8:12, Fabian still wasn't home. At 8:34, he texted, "Traffic is terrible. Accident on 440. Should be home by 9. She didn't respond. She put Jonah to bed, read him a book about a bear, listened to him narrate his thoughts about bears versus dinosaurs, waited until his breathing deepened. She turned off the light and left the door open halfway. At 8:47, she went upstairs and opened the closet where the navy blazer had hung. Empty. That was expected. But on the shelf above, where Fabian kept his leather toiletries bag, there was a small absence. A clean rectangle where dust hadn't settled, showing where something had sat for months or years. The bag was gone. She checked his nightstand. His wallet was on top. His phone charger curled beside it. Everything ordinary. She didn't know why she was looking. She closed the drawer. At 9:03, his car turned into the driveway. She heard him come through the front door, heard him lock it behind him, heard the soft thuds of his shoes being removed. She was in bed. Lights off, still awake. He came upstairs quietly and undressed in the dark, careful not to disturb her. The mattress dipped when he lay down. For a long time, neither of them moved. At 9:47, he was already asleep. She could hear it in his breathing, the familiar rhythm she had learned to trust. She lay beside him in the dark and tried to think of why a man would bring his toiletries bag on a showing. She tried to think of what traffic accident could last 90 minutes. She tried to think of anything that made sense. Nothing did. The next morning, Saturday, Leticia woke to rain. Not the afternoon rain the forecast had predicted. Rain from before dawn, steady and cold. Fabian was already up, already moving downstairs. She heard him making coffee. She heard him check his phone. She heard nothing else. She got out of bed and went to the closet. The blazer was back, hung on the right side, exactly where it was supposed to be. She stood there for a long moment, her hand on the fabric. Then she turned away and went downstairs to her son, who would want breakfast, who would want a parent who was present, who would not understand that the world had shifted in the dark while he slept. Saturday morning. Rain hammered the eaves. Leticia stood at the kitchen island with her second coffee, watching Jonah arrange cereal pieces by color on his placemat. Fabian was downstairs already, which meant he'd woken before 6. His coffee mug sat empty on the counter. He'd switched to something stronger than usual. He was in the living room now, checking his phone. "Daddy, watch my rainbow." Fabian set the phone down immediately. He crouched beside Jonah and said, "That's perfect. The red goes first, right?" His voice had that particular warmth that appeared only with their son. Leticia turned away. The sink had last night's dishes she'd been too tired to finish. She'd left the site at 6, waited for concrete to set, took samples, checked slope measurements 3 times. She'd bent over the forms in the rain with her laser level. Fabian had texted at 8:30 about traffic. She didn't look at him as he moved past her to the refrigerator. The home office was upstairs. She'd designed it with careful cross-ventilation and positioned the desk facing the window so the north light wouldn't create screen glare. The filing cabinet stood against the east wall, gray metal, lockable, though they'd never locked it. Leticia was looking for the mortgage statement from Liberty Mutual Savings. The bank had noted an escrow adjustment, and she wanted to verify the calculation was correct before the next payment cycle. She always verified. Top drawer, utility bills, property tax records, insurance documents in labeled folders. Second drawer, home repair receipts, contractor invoices from the original build, warranties for the HVAC system. Third drawer, she pulled it open and scanned the tabs. Behind the folder marked Correspondence, something white and folded sat at an angle. She didn't pull it out immediately. She stood there, coffee still in her hand. When she did extract it, the paper was thick, the kind hotels used. The Whitcomb, Raleigh, printed across the top in italic serif. The date was Friday. March 15th, that Friday. The showing that ran long, the one that ended at 9 o'clock. The room was silent except for rain against the window and Jonah's voice downstairs saying, "Blue, blue, blue, 2 nights." The itemized receipt showed a late checkout on Saturday morning. Room charges, 1 night. Then a rebooking for Saturday night. Then checkout Sunday. 2 nights, billed separately. Probably to obscure the consecutive dates if he'd been careless enough to leave a single consolidated receipt. Leticia placed the paper on the desk. She read each line item. Minibar, room service, valet parking. She pulled out her phone and navigated to the messages Fabian had sent on Friday. 2:47 p.m., showing running long. 8:12 p.m., still running long. 8:34 p.m., traffic on 440. Home by 9. Home by 9. He'd arrived at 9:03. 6 minutes of margin built into the lie. The receipt didn't show the other guest's name, but Leticia didn't need it. On Thursday morning, Fabian had texted her about his navy blazer. Navy blazer for a big showing of Priya's high-end listing in Glenwood. Priya Nair. The client he'd mentioned 3 weeks ago, a difficult property, significant asking price, required white glove presentation. Priya had called the office twice. Leticia remembered because Fabian had answered during dinner, excusing himself to take the call. She looked at the receipt again. The minibar charge was from 10:47 p.m. Saturday night. The room service, breakfast for 2 on Sunday morning at 7:15 a.m. The knowledge settled into her chest without ceremony. She descended the stairs slowly. The kitchen was empty now. Fabian had taken Jonah into the living room. Through the doorway, she could see them on the floor. Jonah was building something vertical. Fabian sat beside him, one hand on the boy's shoulder, waiting for instructions on where the next block should go. Leticia walked past them into the hallway and retrieved her keys from the hook by the door. The rain had led up to a drizzle. "Where are you going?" Fabian looked up. Site check. On Saturday, the pour was done yesterday. She didn't answer him. She looked at Jonah, who'd glanced back at the interruption. He had her eyes, that particular shape, the exact shade. Everything else he'd gotten from Fabian. The laugh. The way he tilted his head when concentrating. She turned and left the house. The site was 6 miles south. The access road was damp, but passable. The concrete had set solid. It was gray now, neutral, permanent. The forms were still in place. The drain lines ran exactly where she'd calculated them to run. Every measurement was correct. The pitch was right. The water would flow where it was supposed to flow. She stood at the edge and looked at the work. This was what she did. She calculated the exact specifications for things to stand, for water to move, for structures not to fail. She did it while Fabian told lies. She did it while he was at the Whitcomb with a client he'd called difficult. She did it while he texted her excuses about traffic. The receipt was still in her pocket. She'd brought it without thinking. Her phone buzzed. A text from Roger Maddox. Leticia. Final slope sign-off needed by Monday a.m. Can you send one more round of calculations? Perfect work on the pitch revision. She didn't respond. She stood in the drizzle with her hands in her jacket pockets and didn't move. Eventually, she turned and walked back to her car. The drive home took 12 minutes. She parked in the driveway and sat with the engine running until it occurred to her that turning it off would be necessary. Inside, Jonah was asleep on the couch, his head against Fabian's thigh. Fabian was scrolling his phone, a natural gesture, the kind of stillness that came from having done it hundreds of times while their son rested against him. When he heard her come in, he set the phone aside. "Hey, you okay? You were gone a long time." Leticia looked at him. Her husband, the man who'd asked the right questions about her drainage revision, who'd held their son through fevers, who'd left dahlias on her pillow the day they moved into the house they'd built together. She didn't speak. She climbed the stairs and went to the office. The receipt was still there on the desk. She pulled the drawer open again and looked at what she'd pulled it from. That careful, deliberate space behind the correspondence folder. Someone had hidden it. Not frantically. Methodically, a person who'd anticipated needing to retrieve it later without being noticed. She went back downstairs. Fabian had moved Jonah's legs into his lap. Her son's face was slack with sleep, his mouth slightly open. Fabian was holding his phone again, thumb moving in that automatic scroll. "When is your next showing?" Leticia asked. Fabian looked up. "Tomorrow, I think." "Why?" "I'm asking when." 3 o'clock. A property near the university." "Why?" She nodded. She went to the kitchen and placed the receipt on the granite counter. She stepped back. Fabian's entire body changed. The phone fell. His hand went to his face. "Leticia, don't." He stood, Jonah's legs sliding from his lap onto the cushion. "That's not. I can explain." She watched his mouth move, the same mouth that had asked about her work, the same hands that he was raising in front of him like he was drowning. The same man, fractured in half. Leticia turned and went back upstairs to the office. She locked the door, something they'd never done, and opened her laptop. She pulled up her email. She found the attorney's name from a professional referral database. Clifford Banks. Family law. She wrote down his office number. Then she sat in the dark, waiting for what came next. The receipt sat on the kitchen counter for 11 seconds before Fabian picked it up. Leticia had placed it there and stepped back to the sink, turned on the tap, and begun washing a mug she had already washed that morning. The paper made a small sound when he lifted it. She did not turn around. Behind her, nothing. Then the tap water hitting ceramic was the only sound in the house. "Leticia," she turned off the water, dried her hands on the dish towel, folded it over the oven handle, and turned. His face had gone the color of something left out too long. Not pale exactly, but drained of whatever kept it readable. "Where did you?" "Third drawer," she said. "Behind the correspondence folder." He looked at the receipt again, his thumb pressed across the date as if pressure could change it. "It's not, don't," she said. He closed his mouth. The receipt bent slightly in his hand where he was gripping it too hard. From the couch, Jonah made a sound in his sleep, a soft exhale, and both of them went still until he settled. Fabian set the paper down. "I can explain it," he said. His voice came out lower than normal, like he'd been using the wrong one and had to find the real one under it. "You don't need to," Leticia said. She picked up her coffee mug, found it empty, set it down. She looked at him steadily, not in anger, not in anything performative. Just looked at him the way she looked at a calculation she had already checked twice. "I need you to sleep in the office tonight," she said. He stared at her. "That's it?" he said. "You're not going to. Jonah's in the next room." His jaw worked. He looked at the receipt again as if it might have changed. It hadn't. He picked it up and folded it once, twice, as if that would help, and then stopped because it wouldn't. "We need to talk about this," he said. "We will," she said. "Not tonight." She rinsed her mug again. Actually rinsed it this time, and walked upstairs. She lay on top of the covers in her clothes for a long time without moving. Below, she heard him, Water running, a cabinet, the careful footsteps of a man trying to be quiet in a house he'd been careless in. The office door closed. Then silence. Leticia put her hand flat on the bed beside her. The mattress was good. They had picked it out together in a showroom on Capitol Boulevard. She remembered Fabian lying on 3 different models, saying he couldn't tell the difference while she pressed her palm into the foam cataloging density. She had picked this one. She stared at the ceiling. The decision was not dramatic. It didn't come with heat or noise. It came the way a load-bearing wall accepts weight, quietly, completely, without negotiation. Something had been true for a while that she hadn't named yet. Now she had named it, and naming it changed the structure of everything. She would not be cruel. She would not perform devastation for him or anyone else. But she would be precise. She got up at 12:43 a.m. and sat at the edge of the bed in the dark. Sunday arrived gray and windless. Fabian made Jonah's breakfast, scrambled eggs, the soft way Jonah liked, with the toast cut diagonal. He did it with his back to the room, moving carefully, talking to Jonah about whether giraffes could sneeze. His voice was steady. It cost him something to make it that way. Leticia drank her coffee at the island and watched her son explain, with great authority, that giraffes could definitely sneeze because their noses were very tall and therefore had more room to build up the sneeze. Jonah used his hands for this. He had her hands. When Jonah went to find his shoes, Fabian turned from the stove. "Leticia, please." She looked at him. "I need you to let me explain." "I have a site check at 2, she said. "Roger needs the final calculations by tomorrow morning. That's not what I'm talking about." "I know," she said. "But that's what's happening today." He put both hands flat on the counter. His knuckles were white. He opened his mouth and she watched him make the calculation. What to say? How much pressure to apply, whether volume would help, and she watched him understand, one piece at a time, that none of those tools were going to work here. She took her mug to the sink. "I need to know that you're not going to do anything." He stopped. "That we can talk about this rationally." "I'm a very rational person," she said. She went upstairs to get her boots. She called Clifford Banks from the parking lot of a CV's on Monday at 7:48 a.m. She had his number from a colleague at the firm, not from a web search, not from desperation. She had gotten it 3 months ago when she'd quietly asked Elena in permits who she would call if she ever needed a good family attorney. She had not told Elena why she was asking. She had written the number in the small black notebook she kept in the left inner pocket of her field jacket. She had always written things down. Banks picked up on the second ring. She told him what she had, what she knew, and what she was prepared to document. He was quiet while she spoke, which she appreciated. "You were the engineer of record," he said. "For the full build," she said. 3 years. All permits, all specifications, all signed reports are under my professional license. And the property documents. Everything that required certification passed through me. Banks was quiet again for a beat. "That's a strong position," he said. "I know," she said. She made the drive to Reservoir North and stood on the site in the thin early light, checking slope measurements one final time with the laser level she kept in the back of her truck. The concrete had settled exactly as calculated. She wrote the numbers in her notebook and sent the morning sign-off to Roger at 8:53 a.m. The work was good. It had always been good. She didn't tell Fabian she'd spoken to an attorney. She came home Tuesday to find him attentive in a way that had a careful, constructed quality to it, a kind of performance of the marriage aimed at an audience of one. He had made dinner. He asked about the site. He put Jonah to bed and came back downstairs and sat across from her at the kitchen table and looked at her with an expression she recognized as an attempt at sincerity. "I ended it," he said. She looked up from her laptop. "I want you to know that," he said. "It's over. It was a mistake and it's over." She looked at him for a moment. There was no version of this she wanted. "Okay," she said, and returned to her screen. His chair scraped back. He stood. She could feel him standing there, feel the shape of what he wanted from her, the argument, the tears, the negotiation, the path back through the fire that would let him call it resolved. She had nothing to give him. "You're going to talk to a lawyer," he said. "Good night, Fabian." He went upstairs. The near failure arrived on a Thursday morning, 12 days after the receipt. She was at her desk at Ascend Medical when her phone rang. Clifford Banks, who did not normally call before 10. "He's retained someone," Banks said. Marcus Henley. "He filed a counterclaim this morning contesting the asset division." Leticia pulled her notebook out of her jacket pocket and uncapped her pen. "On what basis?" she said. "He's arguing co-investment. That his income contributed to the construction funds, making the property split 50-50 regardless of your technical contribution. He's also," Banks paused, "he's disputing your claim of proportional technical and financial ownership. His attorney is arguing that the documentation naming you as engineer of record is professional, not financial. And that without tracing the actual construction fund disbursements, your claim of financial contribution is overstated." The room was very quiet. "He's arguing I didn't pay for what I built," she said. Essentially, she uncapped her pen. She looked at the wall. "Call me back in 4 minutes," she said. She hung up and opened the gray metal filing cabinet drawer she had never once left unlocked. Third drawer, behind the correspondence folder, behind the mortgage statements, behind the household insurance binder. There was a legal folder she had assembled 18 months before the receipt appeared. Assembled the way she assembled everything, because structures need documentation whether they stand or fall. Inside it, itemized construction disbursement records, sorted by phase. Materials invoices, supplier contracts, the 2 corrected billing errors she'd caught, and the documentation showing the overpayments she had personally recovered. Bank statements from Liberty Mutual Savings showing direct transfers from her account to subcontractor accounts. Timestamps, phase logs, signed change orders. Her name on every page. She called Banks back in 3 minutes and 40 seconds. "I have disbursement records for every construction phase," she said. "Direct transfers from my account. Supplier invoices corrected by me. Overpayment recoveries. I can have copies to you by end of day." Banks made a sound that wasn't quite a word. "All of it?" he said. "All of it," she said. She had always written things down. Henley's counterclaim lasted 9 days before it was withdrawn. Fabian came home that Friday to a house that was the same and entirely different. The dahlias he'd given her the day they moved in had been on the kitchen windowsill in a glass vase for 2 years. She had moved them to the office months ago, not dramatically, not with any statement. She had simply moved them because the light was better in the office and they deserved better light. He didn't notice them gone for 3 days. When he noticed, he stood at the kitchen window for a long time. She was at the table behind him reading Jonah a book about penguins. She did not look up. The papers arrived through Banks on a Tuesday afternoon. Leticia had taken a half day from the site and sat at the kitchen island reading through them in full. Once, the way she read every specification. For accuracy first, completeness second. She initialed where Banks had marked, signed where required, and set down her pen. Her house. Her specifications, her 3 years of measurements and corrections and late evenings, and a concrete pour she had refused to miss. The documents laid out her technical and financial contribution in the language of permits and disbursement records and signed engineering reports. The property, the equity, the documented proportion of investment, all of it reflected the actual architecture of what she had built. She filed everything in the gray cabinet and locked the drawer. Fabian came to collect the last of his things on a Saturday morning in April. It had rained again. The kind of low Raleigh rain that settles over everything and doesn't announce itself. Jonah was at Liam's house. Leticia had made sure of that. She had made sure of most things by now. He came through the door she had left unlocked and stopped in the entry. The house was clean. Her laptop was open on the kitchen table. She was working. She looked up when he came in, nodded once, and returned to her screen. He stood there for a moment with his keys in his hand. She could hear him. The way a person's presence in a room has a sound even without words. She kept her eyes on her work. He went upstairs. She heard him in the bedroom. Moving slowly, she could tell. Drawers opening. The particular silence of a person touching objects they are saying goodbye to. The closet. The bathroom. She heard him pause in the doorway of the office, and she knew he was looking at the room she worked in, the filing cabinet against the east wall, the desk facing north, the room that had always been hers more than anywhere else in the house. He came back downstairs with 2 bags and a box. He set them down in the entry and stood there looking at her. She looked up. His face had changed in the past 3 weeks in a way she couldn't have predicted and wouldn't have wished for. It was a face that had done the accounting and found the number. Not just the loss of the house or the marriage or whatever he thought the future was going to look like. Something else. The count of what he had actually had laid out honestly, now that he'd broken it. She could see him counting it. She watched him understand, not from anything she said, not from anything she did, that she had known. Not just for the weeks since the receipt. That she had seen the toiletries bag on Friday night. That she had gone back to the office and found the paper. That she had sat in the kitchen on Sunday morning and watched him make eggs and talk to their son about giraffes, and she had already known what she was going to do. Step by careful step, while he thought he was managing her. She had been 4 moves ahead while he was still deciding whether to lie. His keys made a sound in his hand, not a gesture, just a tremor he couldn't stop. He looked at the kitchen counter where the receipt had sat. He looked at the filing cabinet through the doorway at the top of the stairs. He looked at her. "I didn't think you'd." He stopped. She waited. "I didn't think you'd move that fast," he said. His voice had lost its architecture entirely. It was just sound now, just air looking for shape. "I moved at the pace the work required," she said. He picked up his bags. He picked up his box. He stood in the entry for 1 more second, and she knew without looking up that he was looking at the house the way you look at something you've realized. Too late, you never fully saw. The walls she'd specced, the ceiling she'd measured, the drainage pitch she'd corrected on a Thursday morning before anyone else was awake. The 3 years in this house that had only ever been in his name because she had also put her name on the permits. The reports. The disbursement records. The actual structural truth of what had been built here. He had lived inside something she made. He had always lived inside something she made. The door closed behind him. Leticia set her pen down on the kitchen table. Picked it back up. Made a note in the margin of the spec sheet in front of her. A small correction she had clocked 20 minutes ago and not yet written down. Added the date. Capped the pen. Outside, his car started. She listened to it pull out of the driveway, turn onto the street, and go. The rain was still coming down. She could hear it on the roof she had designed to handle exactly this much water. It did. Leticia stood in the kitchen of her house, the one she had built, and watched Jonah arrange his cereal by color the way he always did, the way he would keep doing long after this was over. Clifford Banks called on a Wednesday afternoon in May. The settlement was final. The house stayed with her because the house was hers. Permits, specifications, engineer of record, all of it documented in her name across 3 years of permits filed with the city of Raleigh. Fabian's claim collapsed the moment Banks presented the timeline. Co-investment meant something. Professional oversight meant something else entirely. Banks didn't say you won. He just said, "It's done." Leticia hung up and returned to the living room where Jonah was watching cartoons. She did not sit down. She opened the back door instead, The yard had been framed in her head before the foundation was poured. She had calculated drainage pitch to the inch. 3 years ago, when Fabian had stood in mud with her at midnight checking water flow during a test rain, he'd said, "You actually thought of everything." The grass was thick now. The slope worked exactly as designed. No pooling, no runoff toward the house. Just clean water moving where it was supposed to move. She closed the door. Friday morning, she signed final documents in Banks's office on Fayetteville Street. By noon, Jonah was picked up from Mrs. Chen's. The neighbor had agreed to keep watching him 3 afternoons a week, and Leticia made lunch standing at the kitchen counter. Turkey, mustard, no mayonnaise. She ate it standing. The bread was good. She tasted it. Monday came. Roger Maddox sent an email asking if she was ready to lead the Westgate project, a 12-month municipal overhaul, full oversight, her name on everything. She wrote back yes before the coffee finished brewing. Fabian moved into an apartment in North Raleigh. She learned this from Jonah, who said his daddy had a new place with a balcony, and they would have pizza there on Saturdays. Leticia nodded and helped him pack an overnight bag. His small hands held shirts against his chest. She folded them gently. When he left with Fabian that Saturday morning, she did not wave from the door. She went upstairs to the office instead. The gray metal filing cabinet was still there. The third drawer, behind the correspondence folder, contained only what it should contain. She closed it. She closed all of them. That afternoon, she drove to a hardware store on Wade Avenue and bought a frame. Simple oak, 8 by 10, and a print of a building she had always liked. One of the early bridges across the Nueas River. Designed by someone whose name she didn't know, but whose work was sound. Whose calculations had held. She hung it above her desk, facing the chair where she sat. 3 weeks passed. She received the first check from the Westgate project contract. She did not deposit it immediately. She held the deposit slip in her hand for an hour, then drove to Liberty Mutual Savings and handed it to a teller who knew her by sight. The teller smiled. Leticia did not smile back, but she acknowledged the gesture with a small movement of her head. Jonah came home that evening with a toy truck Fabian had bought him. He showed her how the wheels turned, how the bed tilted. She asked to see it work. They stood in the kitchen while he demonstrated. The toy was well made. The mechanism was simple and efficient. She said, "That's a good truck," and meant it in the way one means a thing when one is simply telling the truth. June arrived. The concrete at Reservoir North had held perfectly. Roger had already asked if she wanted to oversee 2 more sites. She said yes. She said yes to everything that was actually hers to say yes to, which was everything that required her attention, and nothing that did not. On a Thursday evening, she sat at the kitchen table with her laptop and a glass of water. Jonah was asleep upstairs. The house was quiet in the way houses are quiet when they are structurally sound, when they are not going to shift or settle unexpectedly. She opened the Westgate files. The preliminary drainage calculations needed revision. Nothing major, just a refinement in the slope angle for the northern sector. She began to work. Her hands were steady on the keyboard. The numbers moved into place the way numbers do when you understand them completely. Outside, rain began. The kind that falls soft and doesn't pool anywhere. She could hear it against the roof she had specified, the pitch she had calculated, the gutters she had overseen installed to the millimeter. The rain found its way where it was supposed to go. She did not look up. She simply continued working, and the work was clean, and her mind was quiet, and the house around her held.
If you made it this far, you already know why this channel exists. See you on Monday.